Hi guys, welcome to the channel. I'm here with Duade. You probably know from his own YouTube channel. If not, go and check it out. I'll link it down there in the description. And we had planned to shoot some birds today, but then it's raining cats and dogs outside, so there was no chance to do anything. So we went here back to the hotel room and thought we're just going to share our experiences we had over the last, I don't know, 8 to 12 months with the mirrorless cameras. And my first question would be to Duade, because you, when you started out, you weren't too happy in the beginning with the mirrorless system. And can you share like what was your main things that you didn't like?
I had the DSLR for like 10 years, you know, started on the 40D, 7D, the 5D bodies. So I was just familiar with a DSLR, the viewfinder, just how everything worked. And so when I got the R6, I remember my first time using it and the actual blackout and the stuttering in the viewfinder. I thought, what's this? And then there's just a lot of things that almost triggered this old man, I suppose. So it's mainly, I guess, the EVF and just the settings and knowing how to get it to work properly, I suppose.
So what would be the main feature that distinguishes like a mirrorless camera like the R5 or the R6 from like a 5D Mark IV or 1DX?
I mean, coming from the 5D4, we had the buffer was just awful. So you just couldn't take many shots at all before it just, you know, froze up. I think it was 20 something photos. So, you know, so it was awful. So this here is 12 frames per second mechanical on my 500 f4, and obviously 20 frames per second in electronic. So that was just incredible. I couldn't believe it. So, you know, going to those fast frames per second, the buffer as mentioned, and I really ended up liking the viewfinder actually. Ironically, I didn't like it at first, but I like it now, mainly because of the exposure. So if you shoot in manual mode, you obviously need to know that your exposure is correct. And on the DSLR, you'd have to sort of use the, you know, take a photo, check it, make sure that your exposure was right and nothing was blinking, and, you know, you're constantly doing that. Whereas with the viewfinder, you just look through it, and if it looks right in the viewfinder, it's generally pretty close. I'm not sure how you've found getting your exposure. Do you even look at the histogram now, or you mainly do it through the viewfinder?
Well, I always used to look at the histogram a lot. Now, after using it for a long time, I think I mostly go by feel now. I think I tend to underexpose slightly more with the mirrorless cameras than with the DSLRs, because if you're exposing all the way to the right, your EVF becomes almost unpleasantly bright. So
I agree, yeah, for sure.
I'm tempted to always underexpose a little bit more, but there's also more dynamic range, so it doesn't really matter. One of the main advantages with the EVF is you can see your menu in your viewfinder, you can review your images in your viewfinder, you have your exposure simulation, and you have a histogram in the viewfinder. So you basically never have to take your eye off the camera now if you don't want to. So I think that's a real big advantage and something that I would just not want to miss anymore. There's a little bit of blackout, but I think our brains just get used to it, because now people ask me, what about the blackout? And I usually say, what blackout?
Yeah.
So we just get used to it.
I'm the same, yeah. So I don't see the blackout now either, which is weird, because when I first started using it, I could see the blackout, I could see the stuttering, but yeah, it's not a non-issue now, which is good.
To actually be able to see through your viewfinder, your camera has to be on and running the whole time. On this 1DX, for instance, I can put it on a lens, take the lens cap off, and I can see through the lens. This is impossible on a mirrorless camera because it has to be running, and then it will actually drain the batteries quite quickly as well. So there's some drawbacks. The main one really is that if you just want to look at something, you have to turn on the camera. But overall, the advantage of the EVF are definitely outweighing the disadvantages. 100%. So I know that in the beginning, especially the autofocus gave you trouble, and this is a comment that I receive under almost every video. My camera just can't focus on something that's close by, or my camera gets stuck on the background, or I focus on something that's far away and now I have a bird right in front of me and the camera can't find it. My DSLR could do this, even a cheap DSLR could do this, but the mirrorless can't do it.
No.
So you had that problem in the beginning as well, didn't you?
I've got a video that you can check out. Some of you may have already seen it, but yeah, because it generally is a very specific scenario that it happens. It's generally if the bird's quite close to you and it's on like a thin horizontal perch, and what happens is if you focus on the background, the bird in front of you just disappears because it's so out of focus. The camera can't see it, so if it can't see it, it's not going to focus on it, whereas the DSLRs had a better sensor to detect it and it would come back. It would focus on it. So yeah, that is a struggle, and hopefully they do overcome that. But it hasn't been a major issue. Like when we shot those gangs, I don't think I ever had that issue. So it's only in that specific scenario that it happens.
Well, I think the first thing is, I think these DSLR autofocus systems, they could actually kind of detect distance.
Yeah.
Whereas these contrast-based autofocus system, everything appears kind of on the same plane and it just goes by contrast. So every single mirrorless camera has that problem, that if you want to focus on something that's kind of parallel to the camera on like a thin perch that is not too contrasty, it just can't see it. It just blends in with the background that's in focus. And the only way to work with that is really to just change your technique or adjust your technique. For instance, when I'm using my big 600mm lens, I just have my hand resting at the bottom of the lens where the manual autofocusing ring is. And then whenever this happens, I just quickly turn the ring and it's not really a problem. And the biggest advice, I know it sounds a bit silly, but is to just not get into this situation where you know the camera might fail. So for instance, you've set up a nice perch and you see a bird that's a bit further away. Maybe don't focus on it when it's further away. Wait for it to come onto the perch, pre-focus on the perch, and then the eye autofocus will pick it up and it will be all fine. I think the biggest challenge is if there's big distances between areas that you're focusing on, and then the only other good option is to either focus on the ground in front of the perch, or if there's a tree with a perch coming out, just instead of trying to focus on the perch, focus on the tree first, because it will definitely pick that up, and then focus on the bird and it will work fine as well. So I think in the end, this is just something we will have to live with the new autofocus systems, because they bring a lot of advantages, but that's definitely disadvantage that you can't really tell when something is really like right in front of you and you're just screaming at it and you just won't pick it up.
Yeah, it's not a deal breaker for me. I mean, it's not really it's more of an annoyance than anything, and I think the advantages of the auto IF just far outweigh the negatives.
If you haven't experienced the Animal Eye Autofocus, it sounds like a really silly gimmick, because you'd be like, the camera could never just pick up a bird in a bush and then just focus on it the whole time, but it actually can. It's not perfect. There's certainly scenarios where it struggles. The main struggle is, for instance, when we're photographing the gang cockatoos, there's lots of red berries around the bird's eye, and they would often jump on like a berry, or we had those corellas that were in the grass with a lot of flower buds around them, and they would just jump all over the place. And this is one of those situations where it's really advantageous if you set it up like the way I have, and I think you've done the same way. We have one button on the back that you use to have like a spot autofocus, and the other button for the Animal Eye Autofocus. So whenever the Animal Eye Autofocus doesn't work, you can just move your autofocus field onto the bird, use the spot autofocus, and it will work fine. But other than that, especially if you're shooting on like setups with distant backgrounds, the Animal Eye Autofocus is basically a fail-safe. You almost have no images anymore that are misfocused or out of focus. And the biggest change for me was birds in flight. Recently, I've been getting birds in flight images that I could have never gotten on any other camera, not even on a 1DX. Now, all you have to do is try and keep the bird in the viewfinder and press the Animal Eye Autofocus, and it will give you at least some usable frames. And that's something on the 5D, for instance, it just says, no thanks. Takes one photo out of focus, it never finds the bird again. Whereas with this camera, you follow the bird, and even if it loses the bird, you can stop focusing, try and get it in your viewfinder again, press the button, and usually it picks it up again. And the other difference is as well, it tracks it all throughout your viewfinder.
True, yeah.
With the 5D Mark IV or 1DX, you really had to keep your autofocus field on the bird. If you slipped off the bird, it would often then focus on the background. Whereas with this camera, if it locks onto the bird, it will track it all over the frames. For me, that has been a big game changer.
Yeah, 100%. I was obviously just in New Zealand and had the swallows, which were a fair distance away, and you know how quickly swallows fly around. And I'd never really had much success on my DSLR, but I thought I'll just try and get them in the frame, and I'll put Animal Eye on, and bingo, it tracked. It didn't get it all the time, but I got a lot of usable images, and the birds were sharp, and I was thinking, this is pretty cool. So I look forward to actually, you know, going out on a boat or actually doing some proper bird in flight. So I look forward to that.
Another thing that I found very useful on the mirrorless cameras is the ability to not only have a really fast shutter with 20 frames per second, but also a shutter that is silent.
Yeah.
Because remember a few years back we were in this kind of tin roof bird hide, and we had 3 DSLR cameras, and when we took images the whole thing almost fell apart because it was so loud.
It's like a machine gun going
and
off, isn't it?
We have a little clip for you here to listen to. And now here's the clip a few years later, same bird hide but shooting 20 frames per second with the mirrorless cameras. As you can hear nothing. So that was actually really good. We, I think, got more birds because it was completely silent.
To be honest, I don't use electronic all that often. My main issue with electronic is I can't hear the shutter, and I love hearing the shutter. My brain gives me some feel-good chemicals, so I've got a bond with the shutter sound. But that will change. But I think it's more that I can't gauge how many photos I'm taking, and 20 for me is just too many. So if you get excited and you hold down the shutter, you've taken 80 shots of the same thing, and you can hit that buffer without realizing it, because on the old DSLRs you could hear the buffer slow down, so you just give it a bit of a break, whereas in silent you don't even really know. Do you know what I mean? That just takes all these shots. So that was probably my biggest issue, is just it's too quick.
I must say I've gotten used to the no sound bit. It was very difficult for me in the beginning, exactly as Duade said. It's almost impossible to know when you're taking images, and sometimes you're just resting your hand on the camera and you're like, ugh. I just took like 100 images because my finger pressed the shutter button a bit too much, and there's no sound at all. And yeah, if you hit the buffer in the electronic mode, it's very difficult to see, and it actually takes a bit longer to clear as well, because it only can do 20 frames per second, so you have to wait for, I think, to clear at least 20, but it felt like it almost had to clear the buffer completely before it allowed me to shoot again. Whereas I think in the mechanical shutter mode, it just slows you down on these cameras as well, so you can still hear it like click, click, click. Not something we want to hear,
No,
but
definitely not.
It's even more annoying if you can't take any pictures at all, because you might miss a scene completely.
I guess one other thing to mention, and some people were a bit reluctant, was just the battery life of the mirrorless. I don't know why Canon put out what they did to say, what is it they said, 300?
Yeah.
So I had concerns, real concerns, but when I used it, I can shoot a whole session. So generally a session for me is around 3 hours, 2 or 3 hours, maybe 2,000 photos at the most, and I don't even go through a battery. So it's a non-issue for me. If I'm shooting morning and afternoon, I probably just need 2 batteries, or you know, and that's pretty much all I need. So I've never run out of batteries, let's put it that way.
No, I've never run out of battery. It definitely takes more, or uses up more battery than like any DSLR camera.
For
like
sure. Yeah.
Overall, on a 5D Mark IV, I could probably shoot 2 days on 2 batteries in the battery grip. On my R5, I will definitely have to charge it at the end of the day, and at times I will have to charge or swap batteries in the field as well. But that usually happens, like I was out recently on a cloudy day standing at a waterhole for like 6-7 hours, and my blind actually kept turning the camera back on. Every time it got too close to the viewfinder, it would turn the camera back on. So it was often just running. And this is what seems to drain the cameras the most, is actually when it's in standby, or you're just wanting to look through the viewfinder because you're in a hide. And as we said before in this video, you have to then have the camera on to see something through your lens, and that's what drains the battery. The actual shooting part doesn't drain the battery much. I had a session where I was shooting like a lot of birds in flight, and it only lasted maybe half an hour, but I took, I think, over 4,000 images on one battery, and it was like 85%. So if you just fire away in a short period of time, you can take thousands of images. It's really the standby or the extended use or a lot of filming that actually drains the battery a lot.
It's almost the time that the EVF is on as opposed to the shots. So
yeah, exactly. I think that's a good time. If you take thousands of shots in a very short period of time, not a problem at all. If you take 5 images but over 12 hours and your camera runs the whole time, you probably have to use 3 batteries.
Yeah, sure.
We both do a lot of YouTube videos. We spend a lot of time making videos, so I think this is another area where the mirrorless cameras just completely destroy the DSLR cameras. Basically having the flip out screen, like the camera we're filming on now or this one, you just flip it out, you can see yourself while you're filming. Having good autofocus that actually stays on you the whole time, stays on your eye, so you don't have to worry about having autofocus video. And then just the ability to actually film through the EVF, your viewfinder, is huge to me, because now I can have a lens, I can stabilize it like this, put the camera to my eye and film, and I can actually handheld a lot of footage, especially combined with the 100 to 500 millimeter lens that has great image stabilization. Whereas on a DSLR, you just had to hold the camera in front of you and then look at the rear screen, but you could never like stabilize it, because you couldn't have it close to your eye where you should have it to stabilize it, and it just wasn't as nice. It just didn't really work very well for me. So I think the video quality is much better as well. I think every single thing when it comes to video is better on the mirrorless cameras.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it. How many shots have we lost on the 5D4 where we go out of focus? It was horrible. Like, it's just trying to do piece to camera with a 5D4 is a nightmare. And so the R6 is just, it never loses your face. It just stays on you the entire time. And the 4K looks really good. We have had a slight issue with the R6 getting to video, and you can't save custom functions, but you know, it's not that bad. But yeah, the video is just way better. And how stable the RF lens is mind-blowing, how good that is, that we can get film birds handheld is going to help us.
Talking about the RF lens, you actually bought one today, didn't you?
Yeah, I couldn't resist, I must admit. So I obviously got to use yours, and had a lot of envy, I must admit. And look, it's just such a good lens to go with our primes. We could talk about this lens all day, but I'm really excited to try it out, so very happy to have this. And
there's actually a whole new sort of category of lenses now because of the mirrorless sensors and because of their ability to use much higher ISO. So there's a lot of lenses that have smaller apertures, but you can still use them in a pretty good way. And the lenses, because of the small aperture, are really small and light, like that f11 800 and f11 600, or even the 100 to 500. That is quite a nice compact lens. So I know a lot of people are not really excited about having an f11 aperture lens or 7.1 aperture lens, but I've found it quite usable in the field and actually really enjoyed how compact and small those lenses were. And you had a chance to try them out as well, and how did you go?
Yeah, I mean, I think the weight cannot be underestimated. These are so light. Like when you go from your prime, so 500, 600, to one of these, it's a luxury, to be honest. And to be able to walk around, so these cameras are light, the lenses are light, it's incredible. And that 800 f11, where else are you going to get 800 millimeters at that sort of cost? And they're very unique, and I think there's even been rumoured like 1200 f8 perhaps, or who knows what's coming in the future. I think it's exciting, and as I get older I appreciate the weight, that's for sure. So yeah, that's a real big advantage of the mirrorless system.
Absolutely. But even if these really expensive RF lenses are not really within your budget, that's not a problem, because especially for Canon, there are hundreds of different EF lenses available for you, and they work perfectly with that adapter. Like, we don't really notice much of a difference between using it on a DSLR or using it on a mirrorless camera, and they all work.
I actually think they work better. So I think, because we haven't mentioned it, but the way that the mirrorless focuses, you don't need to calibrate your lenses. So any lens that goes onto this body will be its sharpest. So I've got a 400 5.6, which is like, I don't know, 30 years old or something, and that works amazing. And with the extender, I actually get much better photos with the mirrorless than I did with the DSLR. The only thing to be aware of is if you're shooting in mechanical mode, some of those old EF lenses don't give you the full 12 frames per second. So it's just a minor thing to be aware of. But yeah, I use my 500, I used converters. I haven't had a single issue with any lens I've put on the mirrorless body, so that's pretty amazing. And I'm probably, for those wide angle lenses or landscape, I'm not going to buy the RF one because they're just so expensive and I don't need it, so I'll just keep using the EF lenses.
No, that's a good point. You can definitely get much cheaper EF lenses that work perfectly fine on these mirrorless cameras, and yeah, it's just been very good.
Yeah, no drama.
Personally, one issue that I found quite annoying that is not directly related to mirrorless or Canon's fault is that it was very hard, or is still very hard, to actually work with the RAW files coming out the R6 and the R5, because for some reason it doesn't seem like Adobe and Canon are friends anymore, or even talking to each other, or it almost feels like they're just sabotaging each other.
Yeah.
Where it's really hard to get really nice colors and not so noisy images in Lightroom and Camera Raw. And you can use DPP, which gives you fantastic camera colors and not too much noise in the images, but then you
have to use
but
DPP.
then you have to use DPP. Exactly. I didn't even want to say it. I was actually lagging just like DPP. You turn it on and it does nothing basically. So it's a very painful program to use. So we don't really want to use that program, but in the beginning, I was basically forced to do it. We've found some more workarounds. I'm going to make a new video about that very soon, my new workflow, because we found something like Pure Raw that can actually clean up your RAW files nicely and then allow you to maybe use ACR or Lightroom with a few custom presets. So we're still figuring out what the best way is, but once we know, we'll definitely make a video about that. And overall, the editing workflow is still fine, but it was definitely something that's a bit more complicated. You've experienced the same?
Yeah, Adobe, if you're listening, fix it. We pay you a lot of money. I don't understand why they can't figure it out.
No.
Plenty of other companies have, so Adobe, please fix the Canon RAW files. I'm not sure how the Nikon and Sony go. I've got no idea, but yeah, they need to fix it.
Image editing is such a big part of what we do, though, or what any photographer does, really. So it's always important that that process is kind of streamlined, because we spend so much time on the computer and we really want to know, or we really want to get the most out of the images, because I think that's important. You don't just want to take photos and then do nothing to them. You actually want to be sure that you're also able to get the absolute most out of your own photos. And if you want to know how to do that, check out my masterclass down there in the description, where I show you exactly step by step how you can make your images look amazing and learn how to just work through Photoshop and just get all around really nice looking images. And even you learned a couple things in that
give me
class.
A cut if I
of course.
Yeah, it's amazing, this software. Look, no, I did learn quite a bit, and it is really important, and you go through everything. I found it really helpful, and it's in my workflow now, so it definitely helped me.
So make sure to check that out.
So clearly we're both Canon fanboys. Are you aware there's other brands of cameras?
I've heard of other brands. I don't know if they're any good, but no, I think there's obviously other brands as well. And I think when it comes to the mirrorless cameras or cameras in general now, I think Canon and Sony are definitely way ahead of the competition. And I think there's some differences, but I think they're like an R5 and then A9 II or an A1 have a lot of comparable features. And I think a lot of people would be very happy with either of those cameras. And we haven't used much Sony ourselves, because it's not that easy to get our hands on Sony gear. So if you know anyone that wants to send us a whole truckload of Sony gear to test, we're here and happy to test it. But Sony was obviously the leader in the market for a long time, and the others didn't really realize how important mirrorless was. And then it seems like that Canon decided, let's go all in. They brought out the R5 and the R6, and Canon has the advantages. There's a lot of lenses, even adapted EF lenses around, so you can find like a good lens for a good price, which can be harder for Sony. For instance, trying to find a Sony 600mm prime lens would be impossible and cost you a fortune, whereas you can find a lot of version 1 or version 2 Canon prime lenses that you can get at like a reasonable cost. So I think there's definitely an advantage there, but overall Canon and Sony, fantastic cameras and fantastic lenses. And Nikon was probably the leader when it came to the DSLRs. Like a D850 was probably the best DSLR camera ever made. We were always jealous. But it seems like they've kind of dropped the ball a little bit with the mirrorless cameras. Because again, I was on a recent trip with someone using a Z7 Mark II, and it just couldn't keep up with the focusing. The files actually were really nice. So the sensors and the camera overall is still really good, but the autofocus was just no match for like an R5, for instance. I don't know what your experience is with other brands or what you've heard from people or talking to people.
Yeah, I think we need to mention Olympus, because we don't want to upset Olympus users. So I would actually like to try an Olympus, because a lot of people say it's very good in that new lens. So, you know, and Fuji, of course, as well. But yeah, predominantly Canon and Sony seem to be leading the pack. Yeah, I can't wait to see what's actually happening. I think it's good that Canon and Nikon are now putting so much money into their designs, because it can only make all cameras better. So if everyone's into it, then it's going to be better for us. So that's a good thing.
For Nikon, it might be Z9 or bust.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the expectation is that the Z9 will come out and it will be really, really good. But if it's not, I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see for sure. We'll see what happens.
So what's your brand of mirrorless or DSLR cameras? Let us know in the comments. I know, as we said, we are predominantly Canon focused, but we love to hear about all your experiences with all the different brands. So let us know in the comments what your brand of choice is, and are you using DSLRs? Are you using mirrorless cameras? We definitely want to hear from you as well. And when it comes to DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras, we've been kind of bashing the DSLR cameras this whole video, but not because they're not good, but it just feels like a lot of the features on the mirrorless cameras are just such a big step up that it's worthwhile upgrading. Where do you still see advantages of the DSLR cameras?
Oh, I think the biggest thing is just the cost. I think with the new mirrorless cameras hitting the market, there's lots of really good DSLRs that are affordable. So not everybody can afford an R5 or an R6. If you're just getting into bird photography and you don't want to spend a lot, look, I just sold my 5D3 for 600 Australian dollars, which, you know, it's a lot of money, but it's a really good camera.
Great camera, yeah.
Yeah. So I had so much fun with that camera, and I've got so many good images, and pair that with, say, a 400 5.6 or a second-hand 100 400, you've got yourself a really good kit. So I would definitely be looking at the second-hand DSLR market. You know, you could probably pick up a 1DX Mark III pretty cheap too. I'm not sure.
Soon, at least, I think. I think the other thing is as well, obviously, R5 and 100 to 500 probably cost you more than double of like a 5D Mark IV and 100 to 400. So I think that's definitely the biggest advantage of the DSLR cameras is the price point, and they're definitely not bad cameras.
No. I guess the big question is, what is the mirrorless giving you that the DSLR didn't? Are you seeing really better photos, or is it just you're getting more keepers? Is it just easier? Like, what's the big advantage for you?
For me, I definitely get more keepers. If I use my R5 with 100 to 500, there's basically no autofocus images, almost none.
Right.
Maybe the camera got confused, focused somewhere else, but you don't really have this sharp, not sharp, bit sharp, like we had when we tested the Tamron 150 to 600. There was always some that were sharp, not sharp. That's basically gone. As you said before, the advantage is as well, you don't have to calibrate your lenses, so you know that any lens you put on a mirrorless camera performs at its best, because it's no mirror box that can kind of mess things up. So you know you're getting the best out of the camera. So I would say I'm getting more keepers, and I'm getting a lot of images that I could have just not taken with the DSLR camera, especially the birds in flight, action, smaller birds doing action. Like, I'm definitely getting images that I was not able to capture before. Or in a way, it sounds a bit strange, but it feels like the DSLR camera, especially the 5D Mark IV, was always a battle, and it felt like it was holding me back a little bit from the vision that I had. Like, I would see a beautiful bird banking right in front of me, but it just couldn't focus on it. Whereas with the R5 or R6, I can actually get this bird in focus now. So I think that's why I'm so in love with the mirrorless system, because I'm actually getting images I couldn't get before. Also in dark environments, you can increase your ISO so much now that you can shoot in situations that you couldn't shoot before. Is that how you feel, or what's your experience?
No, I agree. Basically, when I think about it, so I bought the R6. The specs of the R6 and the performance are almost equal to the top level DSLR. So like a 1D, so the 1DX is clearly, you know, is a better camera, but this competes with it. It has no right to compete with the top DSLR, if you know what I mean. So you've got a mid-level camera competing with the top of the range DSLR, and that tells you how far mirrorless has come, or is, you know, is going. No, I'm very happy with it. I was critical at first, but it's growing on me.
Definitely. As you see, we've got these lenses now. I got 2 R5s now, so we're fully committed. What about you? Are you still shooting with DSLR cameras? Are you looking at mirrorless cameras? Or are you having mirrorless cameras already, and are you loving it? You're hating it? Would you go back to DSLR cameras? Let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to subscribe to this channel and check out Duade's channel, of course. Thumbs up for this video, and we will see you in another video very soon. Bye.
See ya.